Welcome to episode 157 of the Brainy Business, understanding the psychology of why people buy. In today's episode, I'm so excited to be speaking with Dr. Robert Cialdini about the newly expanded version of his globally acclaimed book, Influence. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. 3 hellos today because I'm so excited. My name is Melina Palmer and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Why am I excited? Because I have Bob Cialdini here to talk about the newly expanded version of his book, Influence. There are 220 additional pages and a 7th principle of persuasion that has been added to this, but he's going to tell you all about that in our interview, so I'm not going to get into it here. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while or have a background in behavioral economics, behavioral science, or psychology, you've likely heard the name Cialdini. His work paved the way for so many careers, and I'm pleased to report that he is an incredibly nice person who is a delight to talk to. I've certainly mentioned him on the show before and done episodes on most of the original 6 Principles of Persuasion, which are all linked for you in the show notes, along with one of Bob's other books, Persuasion. During our conversation, you'll notice that I ask questions from listeners just like you. How exciting is that? These questions were posed from within my free global community of behavioral economics and behavioral science enthusiasts, the Be Thoughtful Revolution, which you can join today, and maybe you'll hear a future guest answer one of your questions during the show too. There's a link to join the community, get the books, and check out past episodes mentioned throughout the show in the show notes for this episode, which are waiting for you within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/157. Those already on the Brainy Business list got a direct link from me in the email you receive every Friday. Not on the list yet? Simply sign up for any freebie at thebrainybusiness.com and you'll be automatically added. Those are all housed within the Be Thoughtful Revolution group now too. So when you become a member, you get access to them all. All right. I can't wait anymore. Let's get this party started. Dr. Robert Cialdini, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Well, thank you, Melinda. I'm glad to be with you.
Absolutely. Well, I am so delighted that you would take some time to speak with me today. As I told you in sort of our pre-conversation, I've mentioned your name many times on the show before, but for those who are new or haven't heard those episodes yet, can you tell everyone a little bit about you and your background?
Well, I'm a persuasion scientist, a behavioral scientist with an emphasis on persuasion and social influence, and I've done that for all my career. And have written some books on the topic, and I think one of those is what brings me here.
Yes, absolutely. And really just amazing research. I love the technique where you talk about from early on doing the hardcore, in-depth observational research of having other people train you in their ways, essentially to learn about these principles of persuasion.
Yeah, when I was starting out as an assistant professor, I was pretty much bolted into my laboratory and studying how the messaging process and making changes within it caused college students who came into my laboratory to change their opinions or even their behaviors. But I quickly came to recognize that I was studying a very limited set of individuals in a very limited set of circumstances. And if I really wanted to know what was powerful in moving people in one direction or another via the messaging process, I should go into the environment, the naturally occurring environment, where there are people whose business it is to do that, and whose economic livelihood depends on the success of the strategies they employ to move people in their direction. So what I did was to take training undercover with disguised identity, disguised intent, in as many influence training programs and professions as I could get access to. So I learned how to sell automobiles. I learned how to sell insurance. I learned how to sell portrait photography over the phone. And I didn't stop with sales. I did the same thing with charity organizations. How did the fundraisers get us to say yes? And what do they train their aspiring professionals to do? Because that's what they found to be successful. I did the same thing with recruiters and public service communicators, even public relations. And I even interviewed cult recruiters to see what they did. Right? And across it all, I looked for the commonalities, which were the things that occurred in common across each of these professions that were dedicated to getting us to say yes to their requests. And I only found this small footprint of principles that seemed to be employed in each of those professions. And I decided to write a book on the topic, one of those principles per chapter. And that was, I have to say, surprisingly popular. The book sold more copies than I could have sensibly imagined in a variety of languages. So I thought I had something of value to transmit to the larger community.
Yes, definitely. Lots of copies sold with the original 6 persuasion principles there. And now in this new edition, there is a 7th. And so please do share what the 7 are. And then, question being, I'm sure there was some internal debate and struggle of deciding, do you add a 7th one? Is unity just sort of deeper level of social proof, kind of where they're sort of similar? How did that all come about in deciding to do the updated edition with its extra 200 or so pages?
Good questions. And let's just take a quick tour through the first 6 that seemed to be dominant in all of my investigations, and also in the academic literature. There was good support that these principles, when included in a communication, did significantly increase the likelihood of assent to the communication. Now, likelihood is a crucial word in there because we're dealing with human behavior. There are no such things as certainties there.
Right.
But there are probabilities that can be adjusted. There are odds of the likelihood of assent that can be adjusted. And that is what both of those investigations, the kind of investigation where you look at soundly conducted, properly controlled experimental research that includes or not one or another of these principles in a message, and also what the practitioners were telling their aspiring professionals what to do that had always worked with them. If you look at both of those, there were just these 6. So I can tick them off now. The first is the rule for reciprocation that says people feel an obligation to give back to those who have first given to them. So people will say yes to those they owe. There's an implication of that. Then we should give first. Right? We should give benefits and advantages and information to people who will then stand ready because of this rule that was installed in them from childhood, and by the way, in every human culture, to give back. I always say if you're, let's say you're in a new situation, maybe a new job or a new environment, and you go into a room where there are a lot of people and you would like to be able to be influential with those people, the first question you should ask is not, who can most help me here? It's, whom can I most help here? And then all the benefits of the rule of reciprocity will flow to you. Second principle is liking. Nobody's surprised to know that we prefer to say yes to those we know and like. But there are 2 small practices we can undertake that significantly increase the probability that people will feel a sense of rapport with us, a sense of liking. One is to identify genuine similarities that exist between us and then raise them to consciousness. The other is to give genuine compliments, to real praise where it is warranted. And both of those will elevate dramatically the extent of goodwill that people will feel with us and want to continue to interact with us and do business with us, come along with what we're suggesting that they might well do. Next principle is the principle of social proof. When people are uncertain, they don't look inside themselves for answers. All they see in there is the confusion, the uncertainty. So they look outside. And one principal place they look is to their peers. What are the majority of people around me, like me, doing in this situation? That information will reduce my uncertainty as to what I should do here. So I always like to tell a story of a study that was done in Beijing, China, that shows you the cross-cultural reach of this principle. Restaurant managers in a string of restaurants put a little asterisk next to certain items on their menus. And the consequence was that purchase of those dishes increased by 13 to 20% immediately. So what did the asterisk stand for? It didn't say what we normally see on restaurant menus, like this is a specialty of the house, or this is what our chef is recommending for this evening. Right? It said, this is one of our most popular items. And each one then became 13 to 20% more popular for its popularity. So that's the idea. You decide what to do to reduce your uncertainty. And there's actually some internal evidence that supports this idea that it's about uncertainty reduction. If you look at the data from these studies that were done in Beijing, those asterisks increased the purchasing likelihood of those items for all the demographics, all the kinds of visitors who came to the restaurant, for younger people, older people, males, females. But there was one demographic group that was especially likely to follow the instruction of what other people had chosen. It was first-time visitors who were uncertain about the quality of and the choices available. They were the ones who most took the evidence from social proof of what they should choose. Next principle is authority. Again, when people are uncertain, they don't look inside themselves, they look outside. And besides looking to peers, there's another principal source of information that they employ, and that is the voices of genuine experts, authorities on the topic, who have proven themselves to be knowledgeable on the issues. And if you give people evidence of what others who are legitimate authorities are saying, or if you can give them evidence that you are a legitimate authority on the topic, they're significantly more likely to defer to your recommendation as a consequence. Next principle is commitment and consistency. We all have a preference to be consistent with what we have already said or done, especially in public. Because to be inconsistent undermines our reputation as somebody who's sober and strong-willed and somebody who is going to do what they say and so on, these kinds of things. And so one thing that a communicator can do successfully is ask people to take a small step in a particular direction. An easy step to take, let's say, sign a petition, something like that, in favor of housing for the homeless. Right? There's a study in Israel that showed that if you get people to sign that petition, and somebody comes back a week later, not even the same person who asked you to sign a petition, and asked you to give a contribution to housing for the homeless, those people who were asked to sign the petition, 100% of which did, those people now are significantly more likely to donate to that cause in order to be consistent with what they've already said or done. So, commitment and consistency. The sixth principle is scarcity. We want more of those things we can have less of. Right? We find those things that are scarce, rare, dwindling in availability, more attractive. So again, as a communicator, if you can honestly say, well, there's only a limited time that this will be available at this price, or this is something that is unique. None of our competitors have this feature or this combination of features. That will spur people to move in the direction that's being requested. So those are the basic six of those principles. And then, I started to recognize that even though those principles were very good to me, I have to say, very, very good to me, there was one I had missed, and it was the principle of what we call unity, and the sense in which if a communicator can arrange for us to see him or her as one of us, not just like us or similar to us, but of sharing the same category of social identity, right, that we use to define ourselves, like a nationality or a regional allegiance or ethnic or racial or religious or political affiliation. All barriers to influence go down as a result of seeing that person not just as like us, but of us. So that's the seventh principle that we've added to the new updated and expanded version of the book Influence.
Right. Well, and thank you so much for doing the recap for those who are unfamiliar and have not yet read either the older version of the book or this new amazing updated version. There are already podcast episodes on the Brainy Business on most of those: reciprocity, social proof, familiarity bias, pre-commitment scarcity. I'm realizing I think authority bias needs an episode, so we'll get in there. But with unity, I love that it's kind of it's like that amalgamation, right? Because there's a little bit of familiarity if we're of like minds. I naturally like someone more if I know that they're similar to me because, I like things like me. It kind of gets a few of the principles mixed in together, even though it is definitely kind of stands, like we said, on its own. So I want to ask about a couple of the new amazing studies and things that were included. One that really stood out to me was the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that is just such a great lesson in the piece of reciprocity and talking about accuracy in history and why it's very important. Can you share a little bit about that particular story?
I don't know how many of your viewers are old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. I am. But it was back in the early 60s when the world trembled because the two nuclear powers of the age, the U.S. and at that time the Soviet Union, were locking horns over the placement of missiles in Cuba aimed at the United States by then Nikita Khrushchev, who was the head of the Soviet Union at that time, facing off with John Kennedy. And there was these claims that war was about to begin, and it was no ordinary war. It was going to be a nuclear war that could wipe out a third of humanity unless this conflict was resolved. The lesson that we learned from that was that John F. Kennedy was steadfast and unyielding in his insistence that Khrushchev remove those missiles from Cuba, or there was going to be war. And there were already Russian ships steaming to Cuba with more missiles. And Khrushchev said, you touch those ships and there will be war. That's an act of war. Kennedy was saying, we're going to blockade them. Everybody was shaking in their boots around the world here. But Kennedy held his position and stared down Khrushchev. Khrushchev blinked, he folded, he took his missiles home. In the context of this steely-eyed, resolute approach of Kennedy. That was the story. Turns out, if you look into the recently released information that was exchanged between those parties now, it wasn't that at all. It was an act of reciprocation. Kennedy promised to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey if Khrushchev would remove missiles from Cuba. It was a reciprocal exchange of concessions, not this hard line of being obstinate and never conceding. In fact, that could have brought us to war. But because, for political reasons, Kennedy made it a condition of this exchange that Khrushchev no one could reveal that he had compromised, that Kennedy had compromised, because that would maybe cost him the election if he gave in to the Russians on anything. It was buried for decades until recently we've seen, no, that stubborn approach, which then subsequent leaders took to be the way to achieve negotiation victory, was maybe the thing that would have destroyed a third of the world. It was concession. It was, but not any concession. It was reciprocal concession. That was the tip of the spear.
Yeah. In hearing, because I was listening to the audio version of the book, but just that moment of, I hate that people have been taught this wrong thing that causes more problems for so long. I'm glad that it's coming to light at least. And hopefully by sharing it today, people can then go and continue to share that with others so that we get more reciprocity in the world.
Right. It's regrettable in our political groups that conceding to the other side is seen as some kind of weakness or betrayal of the loyalties to the people within our categories, and that's a true worrisome feature of modern political life, at least here in the United States for me. And I'm sorry that the message of the Cuban Missile Crisis and how it was resolved was the false message that feeds into this current narrative.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll do a little something. We'll do what we can to spread that word and help to adjust that into the future. One other piece on reciprocity that I think is so important for the people in business that are listening, and often we like to think that you want to make everything as smooth and streamlined as possible, and you want people to be problem-free. And I love the way that you kind of put a twist on that to show that problem-free is not necessarily the best way to go, but instead actually having a couple problems can be helpful in business. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, let me say it this way. It turns out that if you look at loyalty and advocacy of your product or service, or in the case that I talk about in the book, it was a hotel. It's not problem-free experience there. It's problem-freed experience. That is, there was a problem that was resolved in favor of the customer or client, or in this case, the visitor to the hotel. And what we found in the general is that these organizations that try to go for seamless operation, that there is never a glitch, there's never a bobble, there's never a mistake that any client or customer experiences with their products or services, that's great, except it's naive. We have human beings involved in providing those products or services, in interacting with our customers and clients. And as a consequence, there are going to be mistakes. There are going to be bobbles. If those people can then resolve those problems quickly, that is what is perceived as a special kind of gift to the customer, who then feels obligated to give something special in return. And here's my evidence of it. I was giving a talk at a golf and tennis resort to a business audience. And the general manager of the resort happened to be there in the audience listening to me. And as I was talking about the importance of having available the ability to resolve a problem, to fix a problem for a customer service, and that's where you should put your budget. You shouldn't put all of your budget in this dream world of never having a mistake. When there are mistakes, there should be budgets available to allow you to fix that mistake. So he raised his hand and he said, "This is amazing what you're saying, because something like this just happened to me this morning." We had one of our guests come to play tennis with her 2 children, and the 2 child-sized rackets that we have were already in use. So she couldn't play with the kids at the time that she had budgeted for it. I sent one of my assistants down to the sporting goods store down the street. Within 15 minutes, we had purchased 2 more, and she got to play with her kids tennis. She came to see me this afternoon at lunch. She said, "I've just booked my entire extended family into this resort for the 4th of July weekend because of what you did for me this morning." Now, here's the point I want to make. Suppose the management had decided we shouldn't have just 2 of these rackets. We should have 6 of these rackets for kids available so that there won't be any glitches. And sure enough, that woman and her kids got the 2 rackets. Sure, you want to play with it? Here they are. There wouldn't have been a blip on her radar screen of obligation or sense of appreciation or gratitude. It was fixing a problem that produced that effect. And that's what the research suggests.
I just love the story. And I think there's a balance. We don't want it to be all clunky. There's benefits in reducing friction. And I will link to Roger Julie and his book, Friction, in the show notes, the episode we did. But, if there's a problem, it's an opportunity to have this reciprocity benefit.
I think that's exactly how to say it. It's where you put your budget. If a problem does arise, you should have saved some of your budget to be sure that you provide a special gift to those individuals. That's how they experience it. And how they respond to it is to give you a special gift in return, either in advocacy of you and your product or in loyalty to your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a great point. So I have a group of global behavioral economics enthusiasts from around the world. We just have a free space where people can come in and ask questions. It's called the Be Thoughtful Revolution. When I found out that I would be interviewing you today, I just said, hypothetically, if you could ask Robert Cialdini a question, what would you say? And so one of them that ties in nicely with the book was asking, how do your strategies of influence adapt to a digital world? For example, social media. And that question's from Adnan Musa. Apologies if I pronounced that wrong, which I think ties in very well with some new boxes and things in the format that you have in the book.
Yes, in the new box, we have boxes, where we talk about how the principles of influence have been migrated to electronic platforms of one source or another, social media or digital marketing, whatever the platform might be. And there was a study of 6,700 digital commerce platforms and A/B tests that were done within those platforms to see which features of the site were most likely to turn people from prospects into customers, in essence, conversions. And they located 29 separate factors that they examined in terms of these A/B tests and evaluated. And some of them were economically based. For example, does the site provide free delivery? Some were technological. Does the site have a search function? Some were persuasive. Is there a call to action line at the end of each appeal that is made to a customer or a prospect? And then there were the 6 principles of influence at the time that they were studying those, when there were just 6. Those 6 were the top 6.
Yay.
Of the 29. So here's the point with regard to that question. The platforms, the delivery systems on which those principles are presented can change. And I'm going to offer a big difference in a minute. But the principles by which people are moved to change, they don't change in the space of 15 years.
Right.
No, they evolve in us, and those are the ones that usually steer us correctly. And things like scarcity and authority and social proof, those normally, and reciprocity, giving back to those we owe, those are things that normally steer us correctly when we follow their dictates. So which platform and which system for presenting the information, those things can change dramatically with digital approaches that are now available. But the principles don't change. Right? Now, with that said, I am going to suggest that one of the principles has gained greater traction than all the others with the advent of the internet, and that is social proof. Because people now have access to the views of others around them like them from all over the world in chat groups and product brand groups and so on that meet. And also we have all of these review sites that allow us to see what people have experienced using a product or service through their ratings and so on. Access to people we would never have been able to make contact with. That's now available to us. And I saw an article that said that people who shop online regularly, almost always, 98% of them say that they check product reviews, what other people have said, before they make a purchase. 98%? We can't get 98% of people in the world to believe that the earth is round. We get 98% piling in to this principle of influence, this source of information, because it's now so available to us in ways that just wasn't the case before the internet revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for answering Adnan's question. There was one also from Brant Matthews that I think ties in really well with what you were just talking about in this. As people are becoming more familiar with the principles of persuasion, they know that they're there. Are they less effective now or not really? And I think you sort of answered it, but just if you wanted to add anything else.
Well, actually, I do agree that that's a concern. And I think it should be the right orientation to take, but with a complicating and mediating condition. That is, we should not resist those principles, when we see them being employed on us, if they're being employed honestly, if there truly is authority information, I want that before I decide. If there truly is popularity from the people who are like me for a particular restaurant or particular piece of software, I want that information before I decide. And I'll give you an example of what happened to me when I was in an appliance store. I was looking for something else, and I saw a big screen TV on sale at a great price, and I knew this was a high quality item from Consumer Reports. And I was standing in front of it, and the salesperson came up to me and said, "I see you're interested in this set at this price. I can see why. It's a great deal, but I have to tell you, it's our last one." Now, I knew that was a scarcity appeal, but I didn't know whether it was true or not, right? And then he said to me, "And in fact, there's a woman who just called who said she might come by the store this afternoon to purchase that." Melina, I'm supposed to be the doctor of influence? 20 minutes later, I'm wheeling out of the shop with that TV in my cart.
Yeah.
Because I'm human.
Right.
And if it was the last one at that great price, and that salesman didn't tell me it was, and I went home to think about it and then came back that evening to purchase this, and I said to him, "Where's the set?" He said, "Oh, it's sold. It was our last one." I would have been furious with him. "What? It's the last one and you didn't tell me? You didn't tell me? What's wrong with you, man?" Right? So where it's true, we want people to use these principles on us. They normally inform us into assent properly. What we have to guard against is the manipulation of those principles, the deceptive use of them, the counterfeiting of those principles. Because indeed, that particular strategy that I just described to you has been used by certain kinds of merchandisers. And in retail stores, the store Best Buy was, the employees were indicted for using this precise strategy, saying this is the last one. People would buy it, then they go to a storeroom in the back and put another one and use that same strategy again. So I bought it, and I went back the next day to see if that shelf was empty or there was another model of the same set there, and it was an empty shelf.
Hooray.
So what I did, and what I'm urging all of us to do, I went back to my office and I wrote a very positive review of that shop and that salesperson, Brad, his name was. If there had been another set on the shelf, I would have written a very negative review about both Brad and the shop. And that's what I think we have to do. We have to be in a position to enrich those people who use these principles to inform us properly into a choice, or at least give us that information where it properly resides. But we have to sting those people who undercut the validity of those principles and the diagnosticity of those principles for choice, because they are undermining the shortcuts we need in modern life to be able to choose efficiently and well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's the reciprocity in taking the time to present that social proof for others and to praise when something went well, and knowing that, like you said, if they had made a bad choice, then they deserved a bad review as well for the social proof to come back to them. So that sort of ties in. Then we won't get into the story specifically of giving compliments behind people's back, but I think this is sort of, people have to go check out the book and the chapter on social proof for that. I love when people use their own tactics and you can see it in the work they're doing. It's one thing if you write a book and say, this is all of what you should do, and then you don't do any of it yourself, you kind of go, well, I mean, is that really a thing?
Right.
So I want to talk about the reader letters and those boxes that are included within the book and how, you're using social proof to show where people are reading the book and talking about it and following up with you, and then having kind of a gift of featuring them in the book. Was that an intentional social proof sort of a strategy or just something that you did anyway?
Here's what happened. When I wrote the first edition of the book, of course, there were no prior readers, but I included in the preface an invitation for readers of the book to send me an account of a time that they witnessed one or another of the principles working on them successfully or working for them successfully. And I got a set of these, and they were so instructive, where you could see how these principles were working in the lives of everyday lives of the people who were reading the book, that I began this feature called readers' reports, where I would include that. And then in an author's note at the bottom of each of these reports, I would provide a reflection on it, what I thought this indicated, or how it fit with the existing literature, or how it advanced what we'd already been talking about to another level, whatever. And that has been such a popular feature that it wasn't designed so much for social proof as it was to accede to the preferences of my readership. They really liked this kind of information, where they were getting more than just an example of how the principle worked in some situation that I had encountered or observed, but one where people just like them were experiencing it and could talk about situations and settings that the readers were in as well in their daily lives.
Yeah, I think it's just such even if it didn't, like you said, didn't start out with that intent, but being able to, you give a little something because people like to see their story featured somewhere. So there's some reciprocity. Like you said, the social proof, people like me, where it's like, oh, I'm a marketing director or whatever, as you read those little stories, like testimonial value. So I appreciate.
Well, let me just say that I'm thinking of writing my next book as all readers' reports.
Ooh, great.
With a comment for me from me on each, because it has been such a well-received feature.
Oh, I love it. Well, look forward to that book when it comes out, and everybody should pick that up whenever it happens. So as there were so many new things in the new edition of the book, we didn't talk a ton about unity, and I know there were other stories. Do you have a favorite story, maybe one you haven't gotten to talk about as much on all the interviews I'm sure you've been doing, that you would want to share with the listeners before we close out?
I can tell you an instance where the unity principle worked for me after I recognized its power. I was writing a grant application, and it was due the next day. And I realized as I was reading through it, there was a gap in it. I didn't have some data that I really needed to make this point I was claiming in there. But I knew that a colleague of mine had the data in his archives. So I wrote him a little email saying, Tim, not his real name, I have this due tomorrow, and I could really use your help with this. Could you go to your archives, get the data out, send it over to me so I could, and I'm going to call you and explain further. So then I did call him, and he's a kind of irascible guy. He's known to be difficult. And he said, Bob, I'm sorry. I can't be responsible for your poor time management skills. The answer is no. And before I read the research on unity, I would have said, come on, I really need this. I got this thing due tomorrow. He'd already said no to that. I said, come on, Tim, we've been members of the same psychology department now for 12 years. I really need this. And I had the data that afternoon.
Yeah. So tying in that I've heard this described where I love the term unity in business before, where you said affinity groups, things like that. Being able to just that one little tidbit makes all the difference. Love it. So for everyone who I know is now itching to go get their own copy of The New Influence, and you have many other books, as was talked about, and great work and research and everything, what's the best way to learn more from you, to continue this education and be in contact?
Certainly there are other books which anybody can get access to on our website, influenceatwork.com. But also on that website, if anyone is interested in training, we have an EPOP that is an online, on-demand workshop, Principles of Persuasion workshop, for anybody who would be interested in learning about how to best become effective and ethical in the use of persuasion science.
Absolutely. The ethical piece is so important, as you talk about throughout the book and as was mentioned today. So I love that that is a key tenet of how you speak about this. So Bob, thank you again so much for joining me on the show today and talking about the new edition of Influence.
Well, I enjoyed it, Melina.
Thanks. Thank you again to Dr. Cialdini for joining me on the show today. What got your mind buzzing in today's conversation? Or perhaps more accurately, did your brain ever stop buzzing? There are so many new insights and studies in this new version of Influence. 220 pages is a lot of great content. That's a whole other book. I, of course, talked about some of my favorites in the episode, including the lesson from the Cuban Missile Crisis, which shows the value of giving and reciprocity, and that stubbornly holding your ground doesn't necessarily work, even though history said that it did for decades. Let's celebrate the power of kindness and giving to others, shall we? Please do share this story and its insights with as many people as you can. Who knows what kind of good it can do? If you do nothing else after listening to this episode, may I please ask for you to share this story and its insights with as many people as you can? Who knows what kind of good it can do? I also love the lesson of the tennis rackets and the difference between problem-free and problem-freed. While we don't want to create a world of problems for people that we can be constantly fixing, remember to reframe your brain's immediate reaction to a problem as maybe being the end of the world, or the end of the relationship at least, and know it's an opportunity to rise up and really shine in a way that's incredibly memorable and more powerful for your customer. I've linked to so many episodes in the show notes for you, including on framing and surprise and delight, which are both so powerful and relate to this idea of problem-freed. There's also reciprocity, social proof, scarcity, how to filter for gratitude, and so much more. They're all in the show notes at thebrainybusiness.com/157. And don't forget, you'll also find a link to join our free community, the Be Thoughtful Revolution, so you can be like Adnan and Brant, who had their questions asked of our guests live on the show. Again, links in the show notes. Come join us now. There are also Q&As with me. We have one scheduled coming up on June 22nd, and I ask lots of questions, and members ask questions and answer each other throughout the wall chats and things like that. There are plans to bring some guests into the space so you can speak with them directly on a video call. Very cool stuff happening there. So come join us. Links at thebrainybusiness.com/157. And as we close out the show, I want to thank everyone from around the world who has bought my book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You, and for sharing about it on social media and tagging me and writing reviews. If you haven't yet, will you please leave a review of the book on Amazon, Goodreads, or wherever else you write reviews? It can help others to find the book and see that it's a fit for them, and it would be very appreciated by me. Thank you in advance for taking the time. And thank you again to Dr. Cialdini for joining me on the show today. It was a delight to chat with and learn from you. Next week on episode 158, I'm really excited to keep the enlightening conversations going with Matthew Confer, who will be sharing insights from his TEDx talk and beyond on the 3 things you must do before you make a decision. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Molina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.